Now let's just move on to the much awaited lecture by Professor Judson, sir. To you, sir.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Agila. It's been good to see you, and thank you for a very kind introduction on a topic that has been very close and dear to my heart, which is the brain. All right, let me start. And good afternoon, all dear participants, friends, colleagues, students. We are going to talk about an engineering marvel of nature, which is the brain. I call it the master of the mind because it is the one that is controlling almost every activity in your body. And so let us see some of the very basic functions and the structure of the brain. Since I called it the master, I want to derive the objectives of today's talk from the word master itself. So let's see how the brain uses the motor control of your body. So it's going to control every little movement of your body, whether it's voluntary or involuntary. It also has autonomic functions. Autonomic means it is governing itself. It decides what to do, what not to do. It is also the seat for all the sensations that you experience, whether it's joyful or uncomfortable, unpleasant. All sensations are being monitored by our brain. Apart from this, we are also going to look into the transmission, how are impulses transmitted from one place to another between neurons. We will see that. And towards the end, we will look a little bit about emotions, how the brain is reacting the way it does to various emotions, and perhaps a couple of slides for the reflex actions that the brain and the spinal cord do. So these are, again, the brain is doing it, but we don't even realize that it is doing that, right? So that is the primary objectives for us today. But if time permits, we will have probably a couple of slides on the mind, because this is the Mind the Brain series, mind you. So we are going to have probably 1 or 2 slides on what the mind is all about. All right, it's always nice to see some interesting facts about the organ that we are going to study. So here are some fun facts, particularly for those of you who are children in this audience. The brain is only about 2% of your total body weight, okay? But yet it takes up 20% of the oxygen that the body receives, okay? A lion's share goes there. Not only that, 2/3 of the glucose that you consume, the sugars, are utilized by the brain. The brain can utilize only glucose, nothing else. Okay, and it's very sensitive to these two things. It needs oxygen and glucose all the time. Go without oxygen and glucose for 4 minutes, reversible damage. 6 minutes, irreversible damage. And within 10 minutes, the brain is going to die. So that's how sensitive the brain is. Interestingly, it is mostly water. 75% of it is water, but whatever is left, the solid part, is mostly fat. Because fat is the insulator. You've seen wires being insulated, right? So these fats are insulating the brain, preventing short circuits. So that makes it the fattiest organ in the body. Richly supplied with blood. So if you take all the blood vessels in the brain and join them end to end, you will have a road that is 16,000 kilometers long. That is as long as Kuala Lumpur to Buenos Aires in South America. That is how long your blood vessels are inside the brain. Interestingly, the brain is not fully formed until we are 25 years old. That's why most of us get married before we are 25, yeah? Not wise enough. But the capacity of the brain is unlimited, virtually unlimited. It's not like a hard disk, 1 TB, 2 TB, no. Here, because of the natures by which they connect, you have unlimited storage virtually, okay? And the speed is fantastic. The impulses travel at the speed of a bullet train. And the paradox is, even the slightest ant bite or pinprick, you will appreciate, but the brain itself is insensitive to pain. You can cut through the brain without any pain. No anesthesia is required. Okay, so those are some of the interesting facts for you to whet your appetite for the next 60 minutes. So now let's move on to the basics of the brain. Okay, right. Now I want to start with some essential anatomy. So the essential parts of the brain are seen in this picture. We have what is called as the cerebrum, which is the largest and the most evolved part of the brain, cerebrum. All our learning, reasoning, problem solving, the personality, all this rests in the cerebrum, apart from the normal senses that we have, speech, sight, hearing, vision. Everything, even the movements are all controlled in the cerebrum. There is a smaller part, okay, just next to it, and that is called the cerebellum. Okay, it's called the cerebellum, a tiny little cerebrum over there, although its architecture is different. And this is going to work at a subconscious level. You don't even know it's working. It is coordinating muscle movements, making your movements finer, these kind of things. Next up is the third part of the brain, which we call as the brain stem. This is the stem or the bark or the trunk of the tree kind of thing. Yeah. So this brain stem also has important parts, which we will probably see later. And this is going to control all the vital functions like breathing, heartbeat, your digestion and stuff. So very important part of the brain is the brain stem. And lastly, this greenish area that you see here is called the diencephalon anatomically, but basically it has three structures. You can see a small ovoid structure there called the thalamus. Okay, this is the place where all the sensations are channeled. So it monitors everything and then sends it to the different, it's a kind of a post office, okay? Receives sensation, sends it to the different parts of the brain. Then we have a place just below the thalamus, so we call it hypothalamus. Okay, this is where all the maintenance is happening, a constant temperature, monitoring of your body fluids, everything happening here. And right below is the pituitary gland, which is we refer to as the master gland of the endocrine orchestra. It is orchestrating all the hormonal secretions in the body. All right. So a little bit more about the various parts of the brain. We have already seen what the brain stem is. We have already seen what the cerebellum is. But in the cerebrum, we have lobes. We divide it into lobes based on its location and its function. The first lobe that you see green there is called the occipital lobe. It's right there behind. And the visual sensations are being received here. What you see, how you associate it with past memories, everything is happening here. The next lobe is parietal lobe on the side. And this is where the language, your some sensations, in fact, all the sensations, the major sensations, everything is going to be in the parietal lobe. Right in front, you see the frontal lobe, frontal, yeah. And this is, again, as I said, very advanced because this is where we think, this is where a lot of memory is happening, and your personality overall is determined by this particular lobe. And in the temporal lobe, which is somewhere near your ear or between your ears, that is the place where hearing sounds and some learning happens. But very deep to that is another area, okay, where the emotional components are all going to come in. So you may be asking, are there any more lobes? Yes, there is at least one more important lobe, but I'm going to save that for a little bit later. You might have to wait for that. So 4 major lobes showing you the 4 the main functions of the brain. Now, having seen a picture, let us see how the brain actually looks like realistically or anatomically. Okay, so this is a section where you see the cortex, the cerebral cortex. You can see this middle part, which is the bridge between the two halves of the brain. So that is the cerebrum. Okay, cerebrum. Remember, there are hundreds of billions of neurons here. Okay. Next up is the cerebellum, the green structure that you see here. Okay, and that is nicely hidden behind and below the cerebrum, the occipital lobe there. In front, you have the brain stem that we saw earlier, right? The brain stem. Again, it has subdivisions. It's called the midbrain, pons, medulla. Most of us have heard about that. So all these contribute towards the brain stem. And lastly, you have the area that is seen as a red patch here, which I already said was called the diencephalon. Now, I also told you that there are subdivisions of the diencephalon, which are this egg-shaped structure, which I called as the thalamus, which is kind of the coordinating center for all the sensations, except the sense of smell. All the other sensations go through the thalamus. Okay, below the thalamus, the purple colored area is called the hypothalamus. Hypo is below, isn't it? So the hypothalamus, what it does is, it is going to regulate all your day-to-day activities, how much you should eat, whether you are lacking in fluids, it makes you thirsty. Your sexual activity is driven here, and a lot of this autonomic activity, which we will see later, are going to happen here. It is also going to direct the next part, which is the pituitary gland lying there, as to what kind of hormones need to be secreted. Okay, and some hormones are actually secreted in the hypothalamus and released in the pituitary gland. Okay, so the hypothalamus regulates your temperature, your sleep-wake cycle, which we call it the circadian rhythms, stress. It reacts to stress, what your body needs to do, everything to maintain a constant internal environment. So that is the hypothalamus. Pituitary gland, we already saw. It is the conductor of the orchestra. It decides what the body needs to secrete when to secrete. So it is responsible for growth, for metabolizing your whatever you eat, and also maintaining blood pressure, and the balance of fluids in your body, sex. Everything happens by pituitary hormones. Okay. Right. Next, what we are going to do is look at something called transmitters. Now, impulses from various parts of the brain have to travel to another place, and this happens by neurotransmitters. And these are nothing but chemicals which can go and excite another neuron. Okay, so what really happens here is, if you see the picture on your left, this blue colored neuron is going to communicate with this pinkish neuron. And that place where they come together is called a synapse. A synapse. This is not a physical contact. They actually don't touch each other. There is a space, if you can see. Okay. So at this end, the terminal, this neuron is going to release some substances. Okay. These are the neurotransmitters which will fly across the gap and stimulate receptors on the other neuron. Okay. So this is called the cleft, synaptic cleft, and that is how they work. Some of these transmitters will excite the other neuron. Some of them will inhibit the other neuron. So make them secrete, whatever. So those are neurotransmitters, which you can see are all nicely packaged in vesicles in the neuronal end, and which get released. Okay, we don't want to go into the physiology of that, but on the right half of the screen, you see that I have listed a few of these neurotransmitters. Okay, the commonest ones that we have all heard of perhaps is adrenaline and noradrenaline. When we are stressed, when we are in an emergency situation, these hormones are secreted. This keeps us aroused, it gives us energy, and it keeps us mentally alert. When these hormones are pumping, you don't fall asleep usually. Yeah. And the last column tells you what happens if they are in short supply. Yeah, you feel a lack of energy, you feel depressed, all those things. The second transmitter that I have listed here, which is going to be relevant to my next slide, is dopamine. Dopamine. This is the one that gives you a nice feeling, a satisfied feeling, you feel comfortable. It also keeps you alert, but without that, you feel a little bit a lack of interest kind of thing. Okay, so dopamine, remember this. We also have the third group, which I've shown, the endorphins. Again, you might have heard of this word, and these endorphins are secreted when in happy states, like you are exercising, when you are listening to music, good music that you like, sex, these kind of things, endorphins are released. And endorphins, remember, are natural painkillers. Okay, they alleviate pain to a great effort. It gives you a sense of euphoria. So endorphins. And lastly, serotonin I have given there, and that is the hormone that actually regulates your sleep and your wake cycle, the circadian rhythm that I mentioned about earlier. So these are only 4. There are many more, but I have listed these 4 important ones with the objective of focusing on one of them, which is going to be important in a disease called Parkinson's disease. Now, all of us have heard about Parkinson's disease, isn't it? We might even have known friends or family who are suffering from this. Parkinson's disease patients are very, very typical. Okay, this is the classical posture of a Parkinson's patient. The face will be expressionless, like a mask. The whole body is rigid. They may be a bit hunched forwards. Okay, hunched forwards. There are tremors everywhere, hands, legs, everywhere. And when they walk, their hands do not swing. Okay, they'll be as if, very stiff, like that. And because the body is stiff, they will walk in short, shuffling steps. Okay, the steps will be very short and shuffling. Very, very classical of Parkinson's disease. And why is it happening? Because this neurotransmitter that we just saw, the dopamine, is depleted. Okay, maybe there is not enough dopamine in the brain. Now, where is the problem actually lying? We earlier saw that there was this brain stem, midbrain, pons, medulla. In the brain stem, there is an area which is blackish. Black is nigra. So black substance, substantia nigra. You can see, if you compare both these pictures, the picture on the left doesn't have much black substance like the right one. So the transmission, as you can see, normally happening on the right side, is not happening here. There isn't enough dopamine to travel across and cause proper movements. Okay, so that is Parkinson's disease. It is a problem with dopamine in the brain. So let us have a short video to see what exactly is happening in Parkinson's disease. On the left, I'm going to show you
In
a
this
video
first
now.
clip, we're examining the gait of a 55-year-old man with Parkinson's disease during the off phase. Notice his typical Parkinsonian gait with shuffling and elements of festination. In addition, notice his reduced arm swing. Notice how difficult he finds to turn when asked to do so by the examiner.
Okay, so you can see how difficult it is for him to walk, but he's walking in short shuffling steps. But 30 minutes later, let's see what happens.
In the second clip, we're looking at the same patient about 30 minutes later after he's taken his L-DOPA medication. There is a dramatic improvement in his gait, but if you look closely, he'd also demonstrate some mild dyskinesias of his head and neck, as his head wobbles a little bit from side to side.
So, except for a little bit of a wobbly head, you can see how dramatic the changes once he has had this miracle drug, which we call as L-DOPA or carbidopa. And so that is the equivalent of the dopamine, which gives such dramatic relief and results. Okay, so that is Parkinson. Now let's move on to one of the major functions of the brain, which is the motor functions, okay, where it causes movements. Okay, so let's move on to see how motor functions happen. Now, there are movements which happen voluntarily, okay, with our knowledge. So these are voluntary movements. So like the picture that you see, the lady is about to serve a tennis ball. You can see the brain is telling different parts to be in different positions. The left arm elbow is extended, the fingers are spread out, the right elbow is flexed, the fingers are gripped. So everything is orchestrated by the brain. The head is tilted, fixated at the ball. All these are voluntary movements. Okay, later on we'll also see involuntary movements, but it is close to 1 o'clock. Many of you might be hungry, but hold the hunger for a while. Just go and grab yourself a drink at the moment. Okay, I'll give you 15 seconds, not minutes, 15 seconds to quickly grab a drink. Okay, your time starts now. Okay, 10 seconds. 15 seconds. Yes. Okay. So you have grabbed a drink. Even if you haven't grabbed a drink, grab everything, anything that is in your desk. Okay. I have grabbed a cup. You can grab a bottle of water or whatever. Now, when you did this, did you realize that your brain had to do so many steps? Okay. Just grabbing a drink. Okay. First of all, you were told to grab a drink. So the auditory signals came, it went to the brain and it told you, but then your eyes located the cup over there. Okay, a target was located by the occipital lobe, which we saw was for vision. And then it told the frontal lobe that you have to start planning for this. Okay, so that was the next step. The frontal lobe before the motor cortex, it formulated a sequence of events, what we must do, okay, and sent that command to the blue area that you see here, okay. So that is the motor area. So that command is given from the motor area to the spinal cord, okay. So the spinal cord has a relay mechanism, so that relays it again to the neurons, which you see here are taking the impulse all the way to the hand, shoulder, elbow, wrist, everywhere information is there, what these things have to do, okay. And then what happens? We go and grasp the cup. Once you touch the cup, the sensory nerves are returning that information to your brain, and it goes to the parietal lobe, the red area there. Okay, so the sensory lobe now knows, okay, the target has been contacted. Next, what happens? That impulse is sent back into the deeper parts of the brain, which are called the basal ganglia, cerebellum, and they tell them, okay, grasp the cup tightly now so that it doesn't fall. So you grasp the cup now, and then you will lift up and bring it to your mouth. So the reason why I'm saying this is even small actions that we involuntarily do are carefully planned by the brain and sequenced and executed. So it is a marvelous thing which happens in a fraction of a second, okay, which we don't really realize. When I mentioned about the cerebral cortex, I told you that there were two areas there, okay. One in the frontal lobe, which is the motor area, the one that is colored red, and one on the parietal lobe, which is called the sensory area. So eventually all the voluntary movements are going to start from here, the motor cortex. All the sensations are going to be appreciated in the parietal lobe, okay. So that is the general idea. However, the pictures that have been drawn on the cortex, when you see that, that looks very funny. The tongue seems to be very prominent. The face looks very prominent. The lips, the hand looks very prominent. But the whole head, the trunk, abdomen, legs, gluteal region, everything is so tiny. So what does this mean? It means that the proportions that we have anatomically are not the same as the proportions that are represented in the brain. The brain gives more importance to the quality of your movement, not the bulk of the muscle or no. It looks for the quality, how fine your movement has to be. That's why the hands are greatly represented there. Okay, so what people have done is they have drawn or created a model of the cortex and how movements are represented there. So when we look at the man inside the cortex, that man will look something like this. Okay, this is the cortex man. We call him the homunculus. I call him Uncle Holmes, homunculus, Uncle Holmes. Oops, sorry, I didn't realize there were women and children in this group. So let us give him some modesty. Yeah, okay, right. So that is how the brain gives importance to the various parts of your body. Okay, so speech, the tongue, the taste, the fine things that you do with your hands, music, you know, art. So great representation is there in the brain. Okay, having understood this, now let us look at what happens when there is a problem in the cerebral cortex. The commonest condition that we come across on a daily basis is what we call as a stroke. Okay, a stroke. We call it hemiplegia technically, but a stroke can come for because of two reasons. One is the artery that you see there can burst, and this is common in people with very high blood pressure and stuff. So when it bursts, you will have an area that goes without blood supply. So that is a hemorrhagic stroke. Or you can have a blood clot from either the brain or some other part of the body coming and blocking off blood supply to a part of the brain. That is called ischemic stroke. So hemorrhagic, ischemic. Regardless of how the stroke happens, the consequences will be pretty much the same. Now, what happens after a stroke is, due to some unknown reason, the right half of the brain usually controls the left side of the body, and vice versa. Left brain controls the right side of the body. So if the problem happens on the left side of the brain, you will find that one half of the body, the right half of the face, the right upper limb, the right lower limb, all of them are paralyzed. Okay, so the trunk escapes a little bit because there is an overlap of nerves, but these are definitely going to be affected. And that is called a stroke or a hemiplegia. Okay, all right. Now, how do we know? I understand from the organizers that a lot of the public are also attending this talk. So I thought it might be useful for you to have one slide to recognize the signs and symptoms of a stroke. Okay, so knowing this will help us to be quick in action. The first sign will be a little bit wobbliness, loss of balance. Okay, they may complain that they feel a bit dizzy. The second sign would be the eyes. The eyes will have double vision or the vision will be blurred. Okay, they may complain of that. Third one will be the face. If you observe the face, you may see a little bit of asymmetry. It may go a little bit drooping on one side, so that is another symptom. Then, of course, weakness or numbness in one half of the body, particularly in the limbs, upper limb and the lower limb. The speech will become a little bit slurred. Okay, you can't understand what they are trying to say. Okay, so speech will be difficult. And finally, it will be, many cases, it will be preceded with a very terrible headache. We refer to that as a thunderclap headache, severe headache just before it happens. So when we recognize all these things, we have to be fast in acting, particularly the last letter, the last T means you have to call for help immediately. Time is of the essence here. So do not delay if you see any of these symptoms. All right. Okay, so from voluntary movements, now let us move on to something that happens without our knowledge, which would be involuntary movements. Okay. Now you can see there that involuntary movements can be physiological movements that are happening without our knowledge. It can be after a disease, where people have jerky movements, epilepsy, tremors. Those are all pathological. We won't talk about that, but let us see what are the physiological involuntary movements that we have. Let us start with a picture which shows you most of the systems that are working involuntarily. You can see the lungs breathe on their own. You can hold your breath for a while, but not for too long. The blood vessels are constantly contracting, relaxing according to the volume of blood that is required. The urine is being continuously secreted and pushed down into the urinary bladder. The moment you eat, you forget about it. The rest is taken care of by the alimentary tract. So all these are happening involuntarily. Okay. And of course, the heart, which has specialized muscle, which is called cardiac muscle. It doesn't need nerve supply. It can contract by itself, but the nerves can increase or decrease the beat. And everywhere else, it is smooth muscle. Okay. And these are not under our control. They are controlled by autonomic nerves. I think we will talk about the autonomic nervous system a wee bit later. Next up is the second important function of the brain, which is perception of sensations. Okay, so we know that there are 5 major senses, right? Smell, sight, sound, taste, and of course, touch. If you want to know about the 6th sense, you will have to refer to M. Night Shyamalan and see his movie. But we are not going to talk about 6th sense or the ESP and all those things. 5 major senses concerned with the brain. Now, where do these inputs come from? We all know that the eye is going to take the information through the thalamus into the occipital lobe. The sound is going to go through the thalamus again into the auditory area. The balance is going to be involuntary. You don't voluntarily control that. The cerebellum is automatically adjusting your balance. Okay, and the taste also is going to go from the tongue into the gustatory part of the cerebrum. Okay, all this we are already aware of, the 5 senses. But apart from that, there are lots of sensations coming from our body. Body means soma. So they are called somatic sensations. And what are they? Pain. We are all scared of pain, but without pain, we won't survive. Pain is very important for the survival of the species. Imagine we are being stabbed by somebody and we don't realize that. Pain is important. Touch, various types of touch, light touch, deep touch. Pressure also similarly, very light pressure also we feel, and vibration when you are drilling a hole in the wall, the vibrations we are able to feel. Temperature, of course, our skin has receptors for that. You are able to put your hands into the pocket and identify whether it's a coin, whether it is a key, whether it's a marble, whether it's a handkerchief without seeing it. That is stereognosis. Just by feeling the texture and shape, you are able to identify. And even in a coin, you can identify a 50-cent coin, a 5-cent coin by the size and the shape, isn't it? Stereognosis. And finally, proprioception. So this is something that again happens involuntarily. Even with your eyes closed, you can say that my wrist is flexed, my elbow is extended, my shoulder is abducted. That is the cerebellum knowing all these things without you knowing them. Okay. Now, a quick slide on the various receptors that we have in our skin. And you can see that each of them are specialized. Don't bother knowing the names of all these things. They are more technical, but you can have the nerve endings appreciating heat and cold. There are some specialized discs for touch. There are bulbs for cold and touch. And also you have specialized corpuscles, Pacinian corpuscle for pressure, and Ruffini end organ. So these are some of the specialized receptors for appreciation of the various different types of somatic sensations. Okay, so we've been talking about a lot of voluntary things. Now let us go to the autonomic part of our nervous system. Autonomic nervous system. You can see that most of the internal organs, the lungs, the heart, the liver, the stomach, intestinal tract, the genitourinary, they are all innervated by autonomic nerves. Okay, as I said, we can't be controlling this 24 hours a day. It has to be happening by itself. And when I say this happens by itself, it is not automatic, it is autonomic. Okay, automatic means you switch on a timer at a particular date, finish. That is automatic. But here, autonomy, it decides what to do, what not to do, what must go up, what must come down. Autonomic nervous system. Now, when something is going to be balanced, you need two systems, one to increase, one to decrease, and they balance each other. That is why we have two systems known as sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay, and the brain has the highest centers for these. Now, the sympathetic nervous system is going to be in emergency situations, when you are fighting somebody or an animal or a snake, when you are frightened, when you want to run away from somewhere, sympathetic nervous system is in place. So only the critical functions will be there, heart will beat, the lungs will ventilate faster, but you won't feel hungry, you won't feel like going to the washroom during that time. Non-critical functions will go down. Whereas the parasympathetic nervous system is opposite. Okay, it will rest, it will digest your food, it will help you urinate, defecate. These kind of things are happening in the parasympathetic. So that is our internal check and balance system. Okay, between the two of them, they will always be balancing each other, sympathetic and parasympathetic. A quick picture, I won't explain each of these things. You can see that parasympathetic constricts the eye, sympathetic dilates the eye so that more light comes in. If you are in the dark, you need more light to see where you are and stuff, isn't it? So everything this one does, this one will do the opposite. It will slow down the heartbeat, this will increase the heartbeat. This one will constrict the bronchiole, this will dilate the bronchi so that you can get more air inside and stuff. Okay, in the interest of time, I won't dwell on all these things. Let us move on to the next slide, which is an important function of the brain, which is memory. Okay, again, I like to keep things simple. We don't want to go into molecular details or detailed physiology of the process, but let us see what types of memory that we have. The first kind of memory that we have is short-term memory. Okay, Short term by definition is only about 30 seconds. Okay, you get some information and you forget it within 30 seconds. Okay, and like getting a bank password, online password comes in, and then you just remember that and go and write it down. Short term memory. Then we have something called a working memory. This is similar to a short-term memory, but it is, you remember it for a little bit longer. For women who are cooking in the kitchen, okay, they will add some salt, but probably after 10 minutes, they still remember that they have added the salt in already, or an ingredient when you are baking. So that is a working memory, whereby you remember certain things for a short period of time. Like a person who's speaking in a debate, he remembers what the previous speakers have spoken and stuff. The last one is the long-term memory. Okay, for this, the short-term memory is reinforced again and again so that they get into multiple synapses, protein conversion, and then it gets stored in your brain for a very long time. Okay, let us quickly look at what are the types of memories, like episodes. Now, if you ask me what are the things that I remember from the past 60 years, I won't remember everything, but specific episodes, yes, we remember, isn't it? So that would be episodic memory. And semantic memory is like general knowledge of the world. We know who the president of the United States was 5 years before, who was the last president, or where is London. These kind of things we have studied, so we remember. Okay, but there is also something called implicit things, things that you know you have learned, but you don't know that you have learned, like riding a bicycle. You have learned it when you were a kid, but even now you will be able to do it. So that is procedural memory. Okay, so we won't go into details here because that is not our objective, but please remember that there is short term, there is long term, and there is one variety in between, which is a working kind of a memory. But what we want to know is what will happen when memories disappear. Okay, so it's just a matter of time before we start losing memories. So for a person of my age, perhaps, I have probably lost about 40% of our memory. So ordinarily this happens when you turn old. But those of you who are young out there, please don't confuse this with the normal forgetfulness that we have. That is normal. Okay, we forget an item in the shopping list, we forget to do something. So that is nothing to worry. Okay, not a sign of dementia or amnesia, but it becomes a sad situation when under these conditions. Okay, when you don't have enough sleep, when you have lots of alcohol, when you are lacking some essential vitamins, okay, vitamin deficiency, you are going to be accelerating your memory loss. Stress, anxiety, and depression will cause memory loss. Substance abuse and drugs also is going to accelerate this. And finally, stroke, which we just saw, is going to destroy some of those neurons there. Alzheimer's disease and dementia, which is the big umbrella under which all this Alzheimer's and everything come. Those are going to be also causes for memory loss. We are not going to talk about all those diseases. I'll just highlight one disease, which is Alzheimer's, which will be characterized by significant memory loss, and they will lose their ability to express themselves. They can't understand their speech as well. Their motor skills are also lost because of the loss of neurons there. And there will be a lot of difficulty in recognizing or processing information. So that is Alzheimer's. Thankfully, it is not that common in our part of the world, but it is quite a big problem in the Western world. Okay, our fifth objective was to talk about the emotions that the brain is concerned about, and that is where the last lobe or the surprise lobe that I was talking about is going to come in, and that is called the limbic lobe. Okay, the limbic lobe is deep inside the cerebrum that we just saw. That is the limbic lobe. Now, in the limbic lobe, I've listed, or you can see a whole lot of labeled structures. So let us look at three important structures there. One is called the hippocampus. You all heard of hippopotamus, yeah? So this is a hippocampus. Okay, what is the hippocampus? We will come to that soon. Next up is a marble-like structure there, amygdala. And lastly, there is a small lobe-like thing, which is the cingulate gyrus or cingulate cortex. Okay, so let's look at each of these three things individually. The hippocampus, hippo means a horse, campo means a monster. So hippocampus is a sea monster. The Greeks labeled it that way, but actually it looks like a seahorse. Can you see the similarity between the hippocampus and the seahorse? That's why I love anatomy. The ancient anatomists were so imaginative in naming structures. So seahorse or hippocampus. Now, what does the hippocampus actually do? Okay, this is the place where all your memories are consolidated. Okay, it is not like a thumb drive where you put there, where you remove it, the whole thing goes. No, but here the memories are consolidated. So I prefer to call it the consolidator. Okay, next up would be our amygdala, and amygdala is the link between the third component, the cingulate gyrus, and our hippocampus. Okay, so this is like Nokia, the connecting people, the amygdala. Okay, and this is going to tell the cingulate gyrus how to react to that stimulus. Okay, all right, so that is the link. And the emotion that you show when you see somebody, your friend, you smile. When you see an enemy, you may probably clench your fist. So those kind of reactions that you give are all going to be happening in the cingulate gyrus or cortex. Okay, so that translates your emotions into expressions of gestures. Okay, so that will be the basic function of the limbic lobe. Hippocampus, remember, very important for your memories to be stored. Okay, and all the emotions that you are showing are all expressions of the limbic lobe. So something is happening consciously and something is happening unconsciously. When you see a person whom you don't like, you probably will have palpitations. When you see somebody who's terror, you may start sweating. All these things are happening through the limbic system. And our last objective for the day was reflexes. Yeah. So what are reflexes? The reflexes are actually the reactions of the brain which are happening very, very quickly, even without your knowing. It's like automatic almost. Now imagine that this lady has stepped on some broken glass. Immediately, she is able to lift up the affected leg, and the leg that she is standing on becomes extended to support her body weight. Immediately, even without knowing it's happening. Okay, so that is an example of a reflex. Also, look at this picture in which you are able to see somebody falling, slipping, tripping, falling. So the one thing that is common in all the three pictures is the hand. Can you see the hand? The first picture is going behind and the front. Both the hands are going in front and also behind. So involuntarily, before you even reach the ground, your brain is breaking your fall, protecting you from the fall. That's why most of the time we end up with a broken hand or bruises in our hand. We never hit our head or our back or anywhere else, isn't it? So that is a reflex. And we also have something called a conditioned reflex. Okay, conditioned reflex. This great guy called Pavlov, you might have heard of this experiment. He saw that the dog was salivating whenever it saw the food and smelt the food. But when he rang a bell, it didn't salivate. Okay, so what he did was he joined both of them, and he rang a bell whenever he gave food. Okay, so eventually, even when there was no food, when the bell rang, the dog started salivating. So what happens here is that for the bell ringing, one synapse works, for the food, one synapse works. When both of them are working together, they fire together. So when they hear the bell, it automatically associates it with food. And this principle is now being exploited by the corporates companies. Okay, so they offer you free smells. Okay, you don't have to pay for that, but the moment you smell, the moment you see the truck there, you are drawn to buy some cookies, isn't it? So that becomes a kind of a conditioned reflex for us. Of course, with age, our reflexes are bound to slow down, and that is because number one, the fibers, the speed becomes slow, and sometimes we lose neurons and stuff. But don't lose hope. There is this neuroplasticity. Your brain doesn't become plastic. That's what that is not what it means. The brain can modify itself. Okay, so even if one part of the brain is affected, the remaining parts can modify themselves, form synapses, connections, and become functional once again. So that is neuroplasticity. Okay, so please use your brain or lose your brain. Okay, use it or lose it. That is the take-home message. Okay, we are almost near the end of the presentation. I have a few more minutes left. So let me quickly take you through the mind. Okay, interesting. I am talking about the brain using my brain itself, isn't it? So likewise, we think about the mind, and it's the mind itself thinking about itself, isn't it? So some people say it cannot be accurate because the person itself cannot be talking about the person. But it is a general term for whatever we think, what we reason, what we perceive, everything is the mind. Okay, the mind is definitely in the brain. It's not in your heart, it's not in your gut feeling. Everything is an expression of the brain. When you feel your heart beating faster, it is the brain doing it. When you feel your stomach turning, that is also an expression of the brain. Okay, right. So that is the mind. And a quick comparison between the brain and the mind. What comes to my mind is the system configuration is your brain. You can't do anything about it. Whether you have a old 486 system or a Pentium 1 or a Pentium Intel, whatever, that is our system. We can't do anything. But the software is the mind. Okay, what kind of software you put inside will determine what kind of a person or personality you are. Okay, so another comparison was that people usually think computers are better than brains. I'm about to tell you that our brains are capable of 10,000 trillion calculations a second, because there are 100 billion neurons. Each one is connecting 200 times with another neuron. So massive 20 trillion bits of information are trafficking every second. Okay, can you imagine that? How many bits are being transmitted? So in an experiment that was done a few years ago, a supercomputer in Japan, I think it was a Fujitsu K or something, they wanted to simulate 1 second of brain activity, 1 second. Okay, they used 82,900 processors. They had a network of 1.73 billion nerve cells, and the synapses were 10.4 billion, and the storage that they had was 1 petabyte. And with that, the computer took 40 minutes what the brain did in 1 second. 40 minutes what the brain did in 1 second. And the brain used 1% of its network, whereas the computer used all this. So if there is anyone out there who thinks that your brain should be working faster, or I'm not as good as a computer or whatever, please take a moment to reflect. on what a wonderful structure the brain already is. Okay, and I'm going to give you a very short to-do list. Okay, to keep your brain health good. Exercise regularly. Okay, this will definitely reduce your mental decline, increase your memory, okay, and the blood circulation. Get plenty of sleep. You must go to bed latest by 11 and get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Okay, this is where brain repair happens, the harmful proteins are removed, okay, and consolidation happens of memories. A Mediterranean diet is what you need, okay, like grains and nuts, fish, good sources of oil, and stay mentally active as well. Okay, please don't go for all these paid programs. They don't work. Instead, try to do puzzles, Sudoku, learn a new language. One of the best ways to keep your brain active. And finally, please be in touch with your friends, your loved ones, be in contact and remain socially active. But when I say be active socially, I don't mean this kind of social activity, Facebook, Instagram, no. So my closing statement is, whether you are a musician or a magician, whether you are an artist or an accountant, you may be a scientist or a salesman, you may be a teacher or a tailor. Doesn't matter if you're an ecologist or an economist, and it really doesn't matter if you're a receptionist or a radiologist. What we are really doesn't matter. What matters is that if we have a healthy brain, you will certainly have a healthy and a happy mind, and that will make you a master. You'll be the mastermind, and you may even be the master of the universe one day. All right. So with that, let me wish all my Malaysian friends and colleagues a very happy National Day tomorrow. Thank you very much for being here. And I'd like to thank the organizers as well for inviting me to talk on this fantastic subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, very much. As a fellow anatomist, I really appreciate the effort Professor Judson has put in this lecture. Considering the whole brain and compiling it together in such a short time is just an impossible task, and I can see that sir has done it so well. Thank you so much, sir. And now for the question answer session, sir, one question we had received is that the hormonal changes during menopause, those hormones, do they affect the brain in any way? Was one of the questions posted here. Can you just answer that?
Okay. Do we have time, Prof. Rajila? Because I was asked to stop at 1:25.
Yes, sir. Just, yeah. Can you just explain that alone?
Okay. If you refer back to jog your memory about the slides that we showed, the hypothalamus is the place where most of the hormones and the endocrine activity is happening. And since your question is related to menopause, if I'm right, menopause, let us look at estrogens and progesterones. Progesterone is not so much active for the brain, but estrogens, yes. The estrogens have a direct action on the neurons of the brain. And what they do is they stimulate the increase of glucose utility, activity uptake by the brain. Okay, so estrogens are important. And after menopause, because the estrogens are not there, the brain functions kind of plateaus. Okay, it becomes a kind of stable. But if you remember the slide on the same slide, I don't know whether the hypothalamus has other actions as well, right? I told you about the sleep-wake cycle that the hypothalamus does. So there may be problems with sleeping after menopause. Okay, and definitely the hippocampus also is associated with the memory. So estrogens are going to have an effect there in the limbic system. There may be changes in memory, although they say there are different types of memory. If I remember right, there is verbal memory, visual memory. Men are good with verbal memory. They can remember things that are said, but women are good with visual memory. I'm sorry, apologies to all the women in this crowd, but women usually remember what another woman or what she herself wore for a wedding 16 years ago,
Very
what
correct.
sari,
Very
what
correct.
color, everything they remember. So the visual memory is good, and that is supposed to be due to estrogens. So
Okay.
off the record, I think these are the major issues. Although it is not very significant after menopause, you don't have to worry about cognitive changes, but mostly
Okay, sir.
the utilization. Yeah.
So with the lack of time, shall we go on to the other question, or can I wind it up now?
Yes,
Not sure.
please. Are any of the organizers here? Can we
Organizers,
straight
can we?
away move to the next
Yeah,
presentation?
the next question. We have one last question because that's
Okay.
only,
Uh,
Yes. Okay. That I will be asking. Right. So one last question in the chat box is, does amygdala and hippocampus are connected? Does this mean that every memory consolidated in the hippocampus is associated with certain emotions from the amygdala? So the stronger the emotion, the more likely you are to recall the memory of the event. Is that true?
yes, very much so. Very much so. Like the more unpleasant the memory, the more emotionally reactive your reaction is going to be. You know, if it is an extremely unpleasant thing, you can feel just the thought of it may bring a lot of physical changes, and like I said, you start gnashing your teeth, or probably sweating or hyperventilating. Definitely yes. Yeah. And this is considered a very primitive part of the brain, although it is essential for our survival. The limbic lobe, all the other lobes have come over it. So the evolution has brought in new neurons on top. So we are able to think abstractly, all those things. But the basic one is still our limbic lobe, which is keeping us alive. Survival, reproduction, sex, food, anger, all these are from the limbic part of the system.